Hey, what's going on, guys? I said I would be. It's me, Jay. I said I would be here for a free reign MMA or professional wrestling discussion. Basically where we discuss the top stories in the world of mixed martial arts and professional wrestling. Well, let's get into it. What are the top news stories of today? Well, Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff have revealed their third man. Yesterday, yesterday they posted a video in old NWO black and white uh, style. You know the way the NWO used to do. This video has been sponsored by the New World Order. On episodes of WCW Saturday Night, on Monday Nitro, and the announcement is the opening of Hulk Hogan's own wrestling promotion. Yes, Hulk Hogan finally is opening his new promotion. He is partnering with Israel Izzy Martinez to launch Real American Freestyle Wrestling. Now, this is funny to me, considering the fact that Hulk Hogan is a professional wrestler, and professional wrestling has very little to do with freestyle wrestling. We talked about in the video here on the channel on Tamira Mensah stock and the Olympics, the two styles of amateur wrestling that exist: freestyle wrestling and Greco-Roman wrestling. One where you can grab above the waist and below the waist, that's freestyle wrestling, and one where you can only grab above the waist, that's Greco-Roman wrestling. But Hulk Hogan is a professional wrestler. He is not an amateur wrestler. He's never competed in amateur wrestling in any time in his life. Probably the only time he's ever stepped into a ring with an amateur wrestler was when he was wrestling Kurt Angle at King of the Ring 2002. So the fact that Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff are opening up uh, a new wrestling promotion that is amateur wrestling based, Real American Freestyle Wrestling, is hilarious and laughable. Hulk Hogan for years has toyed with the idea of um, opening up his own wrestling promotion, but we assumed when he said a wrestling promotion, he was talking about a professional wrestling promotion. Worked professional worked professional wrestling like AEW, WWE, TNA, New Japan Pro Wrestling, not amateur wrestling. But this is what going. I'm talking about. He was going way back to like when he was in left WWE for the first time in 1993. There was talk of him starting his own promotion, and then before he went to TNA in 2010, Celebrity Championship Wrestling, there was talk when he was doing that reality show. There was talk about him starting his own promotion, but I never in a million years thought that uh, it would be an amateur wrestling promotion. I don't think this will go. I don't think this promotion will go anywhere. There have been attempts due to the popularity and the rise of MMA and the prominence of amateur wrestlers in MMA. Um, there have been attempts to make, uh, you know, collegiate wrestling or freestyle wrestling or in Greco-Roman wrestling um, the a legitimate sport. Because the problem with wrestlers, strictly wrestlers, I'm talking about they don't know any striking. They're not going to go into MMA because they don't know any striking. Strictly amateur wrestlers is that unless you're going to go to the Olympics, the sport is not very lucrative. You can do it in high school, you can do it in college, but as to go professional and to earn a living doing it is very hard. There are almost no financial outlets to do it. Daniel Cormier competed in one. I think that was around in the late 2000s called Real Pro Wrestling. Of course, a slight at professional wrestling. And there have been a few others, but they've never really gotten anywhere off the ground. Maybe with Hulk Hogan's name and notoriety, real American freestyle wrestling can do something. But the problem is, too, a lot of amateur wrestlers look at professional wrestling like it's the bastard child of the art form that they, in the sport that they participate in. And it is, you know what I mean? Professional wrestling comes from amateur wrestling, but the evolution of amateur wrestling into professional wrestling happened because although wrestling, the activity of wrestling and the sport of wrestling is very competitive and very intensive for wrestlers and for those that participate in wrestling. For a spectator, for fans, people that are just watching it, it is very boring. It is a very boring sport. Even with MMA, the type of MMA that the casual audience is attracted to are the strikes, the kicks, and the punches. Not necessarily the groundwork, not the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, not the wrestling. Though that's an essential part of MMA, that is not the exciting part. So what happened in the 20th century was the promoters figured out, hey, we're promoting this shit and nobody's watching it, so let's change it up a little bit. So they incorporated strikes into it, and they basically formatted the rules of modern professional wrestling. But then the problem became that and that was called catch as catch can wrestling. The problem became that, guys were getting hurt. And say you had a champion and he was getting hurt, he gets hurt, then you have to put, the title up for grabs. And, it was costing the promoters money. So they figured out a way, thanks to Tootsmont, they figured out a way to work matches. They figured out a way to manipulate match outcomes and create what we call modern day professional wrestling, where the wrestlers and the promoters would come to an agreement that they would try to create an entertaining show and not try to hurt each other. And this became the genesis in the 1920s of modern day professional wrestling. And it became very successful and lucrative over time. It worked out. Well, the problem was that wrestlers that were trained to compete, whether it was in catch as catch can style, which incorporated strikes and submissions, or in freestyle or Greco-Roman, they were left out in the cold because they didn't learn this new technique of working. And some of them did. A lot of them did cross over. Vern Gagne is a classic example. Kurt Angle, a later classic example. Some of the early generation of professional wrestlers from like the late 20s and early 1930s, did that. Ed Strangler Lewis, and his students, Lou Thez, the second NWA champion. They did. You know what I mean? But it became a thing where, as professional wrestling in the once the television age came about, and it became the late 40s and early 50s, professional wrestling became less about athletics and more about showmanship. So uh, amateur wrestlers began to feel ashamed to be associated with with professional wrestling at all. You know what I mean? They would make it a point to distinguish what we do is the sport of wrestling, and that's just entertainment. That's just bullshit. You know what I mean? That's just fake. So to have Hulk Hogan, the face of modern day professional wrestling, be associated with an amateur wrestling league is kind of funny. You know what I mean? Because some of these wrestlers, some of these professional wrestlers do come from an amateur wrestling background. They wrestled in college, they wrestled in high school. Hulk Hogan did not. Hulk Hogan he didn't even come from an athletic background. I mean, he played minor league baseball for a while when he was a kid, but he mostly competed. I mean, he mostly was a musician. He was a bassist and he was a bass guitarist in a rock and roll band. He got into professional wrestling because he was a fan growing up in Florida. He he was big, you know, and they knew they could use him for his showmanship. Famously, Vern Gagne, when he was in the AWA, Vern Gagne, like I said, did come from he came from a Greco-Roman background, which is the reason why Vern Gagne could not compete in 1948 Olympics, because traditionally, when it comes to the distinction between in amateur wrestling between Greco-Roman style and freestyle, usually English-speaking countries like the United States and like Great Britain usually specialize in freestyle wrestling because that style of wrestling comes out of English culture, whereas Greco-Roman wrestling comes more out of French and continental European culture. So America didn't have a Greco-Roman team at that time in '48. So Gagne, his specialty was Greco-Roman wrestling. So he forego going into the Olympics. But he learned professional wrestling. And he didn't want to put the belt on Hogan. You know, he felt that Hogan was unworthy of it because Hogan was not a collegiate wrestler. Hogan was not what they call, in the jargon of professional wrestling, a shooter. Somebody who knew real wrestling holds and knew how to really beat somebody. He didn't know that. So the fact that Hogan's going to head up now, Bischoff has competed professionally. He's a martial arts. He's competed. I think he's a yellow belt or a black belt in karate, competitive karate, and he was a wrestler in high school. So he knows a little bit more about competition than Hogan. Hogan is purely a worker. So I don't see how this is going to work. But anyway, we shall see. I think it's just a way to get Hogan's name back in the limelight. Anyway, anything else Damien or David or anybody else want to bring up anything else wrestling related, I just wanted to talk about that Hogan thing. About Cody Rhodes, people are mentioning, Cody Rhodes. I think Cody should come back and turn heel. That'll be the best bet for Codens because because he is a stale babyface.